WWE 2K20 is bad. Like, really bad. Granted, this isn't new information to anyone, but it cannot be stressed enough just how bad this game is. A game so notoriously terrible that it killed off the series for 2 and a bit years and is considered as not just one of the worst wrestling games of all time, but one of the worst games of all time. So tell me, why have I decided to play this game in 2024? I have to admit though, I did pre-order it. I know you shouldn't pre-order games and you should wait until the release, but I got swept up in the pre-release hype. I've owned every wrestling game since Here Comes the Pain, and I wasn't going to miss this one. I remember sitting on the bus on my way to university, browsing Amazon and paying 65 whole pounds of my hard-earned money on this dumpster fire of a game. Off the top of my head, I think it's in the top 5 things I most regret purchasing, right alongside midnight screening tickets to Fant 4 Stick, a planner for the year 2020, an Ouya, and any pint in a London-priced pub. It's almost 5 years on since I lost that £65, and I'm still trying to justify that cost. So, I've decided to reinstall the game on my PlayStation 5 and give it a whirl once again to really get my money's worth. Surely, it isn't as bad as I remember it being. It's worse. This is really accentuated by the fact that WWE 2K22 and onwards are all really great games, particularly 2K24, which I feel is the best in the series so far. 2K20 feels like going back to the PS2 era of wrestling games, just without the nostalgia or the fun factor. Look, I'm not going to pretend like every prior WWE game up until 2K20 was some sort of gaming masterpiece. Rather the opposite. The series up until this point has had a fair share of bugs or issues that really shouldn't have been missed during quality assurance testing. But I don't believe for one single solitary second that WWE 2K20 was even given assurance testing, never mind quality assurance. You know the 1997 film Being the Ultimate Disaster movie, yeah? Well, just imagine that Visual Concepts was Mr. Bean, and WWE 2K20 was Whistler's mother. Yeah, that's 2K20, and that's exactly how I imagine development went for it. Turning the game on, I'm immediately reminded just how piss poor the graphics actually are for a 2019 game. Granted, this isn't Rockstar Games, but Red Dead Redemption 2 released a year before and had graphics so good they had realistic horsebollocks, while 2K20 is just horsebollocks. I was actually taken aback by how poor the graphics actually are. I remember them being better than this, to be fair. Certainly felt like a downgrade compared to 2K19, right? But surely not. The years of games graphics being downgraded are a thing of the past. Watch Dogs. I wanted to check this out, so I actually turned off 2K20 and installed 2K19. And sure enough, the graphics were actually better in the game that came out the year before. Now, I wouldn't say I'm a graphics snob by any means, but how do you actually regress in this area? Look no further than The Rock's in-game model. You'd think that with Dwayne being an international superstar and one of the biggest wrestlers to ever lace up a pair of boots, they'd have been able to nail his character model. After all, they have been making him in-game for almost 20 years at this point. Instead, it appears they did a Spaceballs and captured his stunt double. And don't even get me started on Randy Savage, who looks more like a bulked up Lord Farquaad than he does the Macho Man. One of 2K20's major selling points was its large roster, which spanned Raw, SmackDown, NXT, and also included members of the NXT UK roster too. On the surface, I am somewhat impressed that they managed to pack in 238 different wrestlers, but it doesn't really mean much when all of them, well, play the same or look like they've been ripped from an M. Dickey game. Even TNA Impact, which released in 2008, had better looking wrestlers than this game. It's a solid base roster, but with some notable omissions in the form of Walter, Dominik Dijakovic, and of course some legends. It's the sort of roster that could really do with some DLC to give it that little boost. More on that later. Jumping into my first match on WWE 2K20 since pre-pandemic Fraser last put it down, I played Adam Cole versus AJ Styles. Cole's character model looks plastic and strangely large as he makes his way to the ring, his eyes lifeless and his hair strangely motionless. I wonder if he's actually been playing the game. For some reason, Visual Concepts decided that in WWE 2K20 that the hair on wrestlers shouldn't have physics attached to them. Instead, it remains somewhat solid. Unfortunately, solid is not how I describe the gameplay. The bell rings and I met with my first bug within mere seconds. The referee has decided to clip through the ring and was just a torso sort of flailing around the canvas. He remained like this throughout the whole match, which eventually ended with me quitting as he couldn't count the pin. It's really off to a flying start already. I remember playing it when it first launched with wrestlers teleporting or floating across the screen, weapons sinking into the canvas, never to be seen again, and character models getting tied up in the ropes almost like the game was taking them hostage. I would have thought that some of these issues would be sorted and fixed by the year 2024, but really, who can blame 2K for leaving it in the attic and only feeding it a bucket of fish heads once a week? I'll be honest, when it actually works, it's not like the gameplay is abysmal. It's more meh. Granted, it is a total downgrade compared to 2K19, which many consider to have great in-ring gameplay. It just doesn't make me want to throw my controller out the window when it works. That isn't often, but at least it's something. It feels unremarkable, like if they drew the gameplay from previous games from memory, while they were drunk. This is highlighted pretty well by the terrible targeting system in the game. More often than not, you'll completely miss your target with a running attack and instead send poor Charles Robinson, or his non-union video game equivalent, flying with a claymore kick. After playing maybe 5 or 6 more matches with only minimal glitches, just, the occasional clipping or mild instance of exorcism, I decided to reacquaint myself with my favourite mode in every WWE game, Universe Mode. Yep. I'm also that schmuck who every year I get burned with how little love Universe Mode shows to players, only to come running back every single year when they promise it's changed. It's a vicious cycle. So, what features got me to fork over £65? The match limit for shows in Universe Mode was increased from 7 to 9. Pay-per-views were doubled to 14 matches, and you can now have 7 championships on each show alongside 4 simultaneous rivalries. Proper Game of the Year material. Alongside that, they added new promo lines and cutscenes for said rivalries in Universe Mode, but the game was so broken at launch that you'd be lucky if you saw or heard even 2% of the new additions. To give the game some credit, the previously mentioned additions were a nice quality of life improvement over 2K19. It's just a shame that your quality of life actually decreases by simply booting this game up. Really though, these little tweaks could have been a free patch for 2K19 and you'd be none the wiser. It isn't long before I experienced my next fun little 2K20 quirk. Following a match between Daniel Bryan and Buddy Murphy, I was attacked by what could either be a ghost or John Cena. It is really hard to tell when you can't see him. This is basically how I remember my time with 2K20 going back when it first came out. Wrestlers would be missing from cutscenes, or the game would just constantly crash. Despite numerous patches since the game's release, it's not exactly improved. The rivalry system is as bare bones as it comes. Granted, it's still not really improved in this area by 2K24. Storylines don't really happen, and when they do, they don't really make any sense. In years past, Universe Mode has felt like a way to keep the game interesting long past its release, but it's fairly evident that in 2K20, Visual Concepts barely had any interest in including it at the release. Visual Concepts could have used 2K20 to really put their mark on Universe Mode, a part of the game that has severely lacked in the preceding years and often felt like it was regressing year on year. Essentially, they pulled the mode straight from 2K19, dropped it on the floor, causing it to smash, leading them to frantically glue it back together, but without any clue where each part went to begin with. I spent far too long in this mode when it first launched 5 years ago. My PlayStation account registers over 170 embarrassing hours in the game alone, with a majority of that coming from Universe Mode. The only way I can fathom being able to spend that much time with the game is if somehow the world had shut down and I'd run out of things to play. Having spent that much time with the mode, I think I have some good authority to say that it sucks. Looking forward to 2K24, and while it's still not perfect, at least Universe Mode works, for the most part. Still though, it's got nothing on the glory days of SmackDown vs Raw 2011 or WWE 13. After bashing my head against the wall that is the non-functioning Universe Mode for a good few hours, I decided to explore the Showcase Mode. And calling it that is being ironic, really, because the only thing it showcases is exactly how broken this game is. 2K20's Showcase mode takes a look at the women's evolution through the lens of the four horsewomen: Bayley, Charlotte, Sasha, and Becky. After the pretty stellar Daniel Bryan showcase the year before, the series was building a bit of momentum with their signature mode. The game has you play through 15 different matches from the Four Horsewomen's career, starting with their time in NXT in 2015, right through to Becky Lynch's main event moment at WrestleMania 35. While a great idea in concept, the execution of it leaves a lot to be desired. Playing through matches takes far too long, and they have failed to implement any mid-match checkpoints should you lose the match before completing any of the mandatory objectives. This is made even more infuriating by the fact that you sometimes have to quit a match 25 minutes in when a bug stops you in your tracks. Speaking of the objectives, a large majority of them didn't actually trigger for me, and when they do, it means the matches lack any creativity. I'm simply going through the motions to hit the objectives, but it isn't fun, especially when the game doesn't actually do what you tell it to. Nothing is more painful than getting close to completing all the objectives and then a bug causes the referee to not be able to count 3, or I get trapped outside the barricade without any means to get back in the ring. Both of these things that I recall happening to me back when I played it in 2019. Thankfully, I didn't experience anything nearly as bad as it now, but it doesn't make it any less of a chore to play through. Like with most WWE produced video packages, the ones that play before each match are engaging, and I enjoy taking the time to watch them, despite how poor a quality the videos actually are. Seriously, this is a WWE produced game. Could they not have got higher quality content? However, this is a game we're talking about, not a movie or a TV show. If one of the more enjoyable aspects of a mode in your game is being able to watch real life video packages rather than playing it, you're doing something wrong. The in-ring action of the mode is like the rest of the game, tedious and uneventful. Add on the fact that the horsewomen look lifeless and dead behind the eyes, while their hair remains static and plastic-like due to Visual Concepts deciding not to include the physics system that the previous year's game had, making this mode feel kinda like a shell of its former self. What I'm saying is, don't waste your time playing through this mode when you could simply just watch the matches on the WWE Network or other websites where you can watch wrestling. I'm someone who usually really enjoys these showcase modes, but after the first couple matches it started to really wear thin, which gave me a good time to pause my trip down memory lane and start my own career as a WWE wrestler in this year's My Career mode. Let's face it, this game mode has never been The Last of Us in terms of writing. Hell, it's not even Saints Row quality, and 2K20 is no exception. My go-to created wrestler, much to the amusement of the entire Cultaholic office, is a character called Matt Riley, usually mocked for how boring a name it is for a wrestler. Sorry to anyone watching called Matt Riley. However, you don't really get to play as your wrestler in My Career. Instead, they lump you with two predefined characters, Red and Trey, lifelong friends who dream of making it big in WWE. Look, I can understand this to an extent because you want to give the wrestlers voice acting and be referred to correctly throughout the game. It's just neither Red or Trey really fit the vibe of what I want for My Career. Really, they should drop the my aspect of it, as I felt I didn't really have any input in the career side of things. It begins with both Trey and Red being inducted into the Hall of Fame, with the majority of the story being told via flashbacks. Sure, it's interesting enough to have this be the way the story is told, but the writing is terrible. Again, they ain't exactly Naughty Dog. There are some interdimensional battles in Purgatory, you fight a cyborg Samoa Joe, and you have run-ins with Nikki Cross while she crawls like something out of The Exorcist through a multiversal swamp straight from hell. While yes, it's a video game, it just doesn't fit the vibe of the more simulation-style gameplay that the 2K series has evolved into. If this was 2009 and I was still a kid, I'd be eating this up and loving it. But it just feels so disconnected to the rest of the game that it feels stupid. I miss the days of Road to WrestleMania. Now, granted, some of that was a bit silly at times, zombie Santino Marella, but they were fun storylines that were primarily based in the real world. I'd have so much more fun getting to choose a current WWE superstar to play as throughout a year or a specific period of time than I did playing through 2K20's career mode. As much flack as AEW Fight Forever has got in the past year, myself included in that, they at least had a good idea when it came to their career mode, even if the execution wasn't there. WWE 2K20 just feels like a half-arsed attempt at padding out the game to justify charging sky-high prices for low-quality content. Speaking of low quality, the graphics aren't exactly something to write home about. I know I've touched on them before with the plastic dead behind the eyes look of the wrestlers, but it's even worse here in my career. Just look at how bad the environments look when not in arena. Hell, it still looks pretty crap in an arena too. Characters' faces look like melted action figures, their eyes look like they've been on a weekend-long bender featuring a bit too much Peruvian marching powder, and when they speak, it looks like someone's first attempt at ventriloquism, which is appropriate because they look as uncomfortably stiff as they would if they had an arm up their ass working their mouth like a puppet. Thank God the mode has improved since then. 2K23's The Lock storyline and 2K24's Undisputed and Unleashed career modes are good examples of how to nail what they were going for with 2K20. Playing it back in 2019, I remember completing the whole My Career, but sitting down now to play it genuinely gave me a headache. If you feel so inclined to return to 2K20 for whatever reason, just give this mode a skip. It's for your own good. Now, I mentioned Matt Riley, my go-to created wrestler. Well, it was a bit of a chore to actually create him in 2K20. The suite on offer feels like a massive step back from 2K19, and just to highlight this point, all of the top creators for community creations left in droves back to 2K19 and remained there until the release of 2K22. Yes, it was that bad. But while it does carry over pretty much everything that was in 2K19, it just feels way more limited. It's so limited that they actually removed Create a Championship mode from the game because Visual Concepts just couldn't get it to work. Yep, let that sink in. They removed a feature that has been in pretty much every single game because they couldn't get it to work. Yet, they still charge the same price for the game anyways. It kind of reminds me of WWE 2K15 when it launched on PS4 and Xbox One. It felt like a shell of its former self with numerous features missing or lacking. Except, WWE 2K20 had no excuse as they didn't change console generations. They just simply couldn't be arsed to take the time to fix the bug, so they removed it instead. Now granted, they did eventually add Create a Championship back in via patch, it should be noted, but it really was a little bit too late at that point. By the time it was patched in, I'm fairly certain the only people still playing the game were sadomasochists or people who put the wrong disc in their PlayStation. I was about to say looking past the Create a Championship mode, but really, what is there to look past? But I'll continue anyway. WWE 2K20 also lacks another staple of nearly every wrestling game imaginable: preset movesets. Now, let's say I didn't want to create Matt Riley and instead wanted to make a Will Ospreay call. In any previous game, there would be a 90% chance that the developers would have crafted a preset moveset called something like Assassin of the Air or William Essexton or something of that nature for you to pick. None of that here in 2K20. Nope, you will have to manually create the moveset top to bottom, which, let's face it, is a very boring task. This, I think, is actually worse for when you want to create legends who may not have actually been included in this year's game. For years, you'd have the movesets of the likes of RVD, Terry Funk, Scott Steiner, and more all readily available for you to choose. But not in 2K20. It's just a stupid step back for the creation suite. I genuinely can't fathom why they would remove this. Hell, even AEW Fight Forever had this feature. In fact, it was packed full of custom movesets for you to choose from. Usually the best aspect of the creation suite is the community creations. The ability to download other people's creations at just a click of a button has been one of the greatest additions to the WWE game series. The likes of What's the Status, Gameville, and Petchy are all well known for their realistic and acclaimed creations. But as I've said, 2K20 was so bad that the best creators went running back to 2K19. This effectively left the WWE 2K20 community creation scene to die. And even 2K acknowledged this as they kept the server alive for 2K19 long past its usual shelf life. Obviously, the servers for both games have been shut down by now, but at launch, it was basically a ghost town. Speaking of ghost towns, WWE 2K20 decided to do away with the usual post-launch DLC format of additional wrestlers in packs in favour of something they called 2K Originals. Each DLC pack would feature its own theme, such as the horror-themed Bump in the Night or the Mad Max-inspired Wasteland Wanderers. Each pack brought with it new playable superstars, arenas, and mini showcase modes that fit the theme of the pack. The first DLC pack launched alongside the game as a pre-order bonus and saw Bray Wyatt's The Fiend added to the game. The Bump in the Night pack added a showcase mode based around Wyatt alongside some brand new 2K Tower Gauntlet-like modes. But where are those new playable superstars, I hear you typing in the comments below? See, normally when you download a brand new WWE 2K DLC, you got a 100% chance of it including some new wrestlers. But 2K20 is a genetic freak and isn't normal, so you have a 0% chance at best. That's right, the DLC didn't actually include brand new wrestlers, just reskins of the already playable roster. I'm sure everyone was champing at the bit to play a zombie Sami Zayn, or Sheamus but if he was in Shaun of the Dead, or a literal snake version of Randy Orton. Anyone? I remember this DLC being bad when it first launched, but my god has it aged pretty poorly now. I just don't understand who this DLC pack was catering to. And it's not just this DLC, every pack followed the same format. Overlord Samoa Joe followed, Glam Rocker Johnny Gargano was next, and Cyber Naomi rounded things off, just to name a few. Playing it now, it sticks out like a sore thumb, and the quality of the wrestler models just looks poor. Remember I mentioned the piss poor community creations? Well, the DLC, Fiend aside, looks like something you'd find posted by like XX_your mum_XX. Comparing the DLC packs to other games in hindsight, it's actually an embarrassment that 2K was charging, wait for it, $29. However, if you didn't buy the bundle for $29 and just wanted the individual DLC for some godforsaken reason, that would set you back $14.99 a pack. I know I crapped on AEW Fight Forever for its DLC and pricing structure earlier this year, but at least that doesn't feel like a half-arsed cash grab. The actual showcase modes included in the DLC feel like a chore to play with tedious objectives and subpar gameplay. Made matters worse with how boring the actual story is. Each one has a story thread throughout, which is supposed to give you a reason as to why you'd sit through a series of matches with these wacky characters. I forced myself to replay them for the purposes of this video, and I can't believe how crap they actually are. I'll be honest. I'm someone who loves a good bit of crap entertainment. The Room is one of my favourite films for that exact reason. But this is more Morbius bad than something from the mind of Tommy Wiseau. It might have been better if he'd made it, actually. To say one thing positive about it, the only one I slightly enjoyed was the Southpaw Regional Wrestling one, but by the time I got around to that, the entire concept had overstayed its welcome. Usually with WWE games DLC, you receive a bunch of brand new moves to go along with your brand new wrestlers. Sometimes they just throw some cool new moves in for the fun of it, like WWE 2K24 adding the Coffin Drop and the Hidden Blade in a random DLC pack. Well, 2K20 kinda did this, but like all things with this game, the actual application of it was pretty trash. Animations were wonky and clearly were not motion captured. The speed of the moves were also, for some reason, faster than anything else in the game. Like they were being played at like 2.5 times speed. And even worse than that, they were completely and utterly ridiculous. For example, there's a move in the game where Sheamus does like an uppercut and it launches his opponent 15 feet in the air. Look, I get the DLC is over the top, but when am I realistically going to use this move outside of the silly showcase mode? It just feels like a wasted use of both 2K's resources and my money. Essentially, if you're planning for some stupid reason to return to WWE 2K20, don't bother with the DLC. Instead, use that money to buy Cultaholic merch from cultaholicshop.com or head over at cultaholic.com/Patreon and join us. Look, I had to find a way to get the cheap plugin. I say that as if you'd actually be able to access the DLC in the first place. Unless you bought it back in 2019, like this idiot, there actually isn't a way for you to download it, as 2K has delisted the game and the DLC from online stores back in 2022. I really wanted to test out the online offerings of 2K20, but mercifully, with the servers being shut down, that just wasn't on the cards. From memory though, I remember having more bugs than a season of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. I was frequently being kicked from matches, referees were clipping through barricades, and matches were unable to end due to a myriad of glitches. So really no difference to the rest of the game. It's actually quite sad to go back to 2K20 now and see the state of the game when it launched. I'm relieved that the audience reception to it actually did make an impact and forced 2K to rethink their game plan going forward. This was without a doubt rock bottom for the series and made it evidently clear that something had to change. The 2 years that they took off from the series allowed Visual Concepts to fully get a hang of how the engine worked, what made a good wrestling game, and more importantly, what the fans wanted from the series. I am relieved to say that since WWE 2K22, 23 and 24 have all been released and are much better games. In fact, some of the best the series has produced. But I can't help but worry in the back of my mind that 2K20 could always happen again and hit like an RKO out of nowhere. It's ironic that when you look at the state of WWE programming in 2019, you'll see that it was similarly crap with low quality writing and poor in-ring content. I find it quite funny that as much as I've just knocked the game, it kind of perfectly captured the quality of WWE at the time, but in video game form. So I guess, in one way, it actually succeeded and got something right after all.